Good afternoon, one and all present here. I am Priyanshu Pandey from Indic Researchers Forum. Welcome to the first session, Colonial Legacies, Afghan Jihad, and the Evolution in India-Afghanistan Relations in Modern History. For this session, we have Group Captain Dr. Srinivasan as the session chair. Group Captain Dr. R. Srinivasan, recipient of the Visisht Seva Medal, served in the Indian Air Force for 32 years and retired in 2018. He holds degrees in MSW, LLB, a postgraduate diploma in International Humanitarian Law, and a PhD in Political Sociology from Pondicherry University. He is also SATS alumnus of the International Committee of Red Cross. An internationally published SCOPUS-indexed author, he has written 9 books and several chapters on international relations and conflict. He was awarded the Visisht Seva Medal by the President of India in 2012. Currently, he is an independent researcher and chief of the Electronic Journal of Social and Strategic Studies and the founder-director of Praghna Centre for Research. Welcome, sir. The key speakers for this session are Dr. Nanda Kishor, MS, who is an associate professor and head at the Department of Politics and International Studies at Pondicherry University. He was formerly the head of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal. His expertise is in geopolitics of West Asia, India's foreign policy, concept of war and peace in geopolitics, terrorism and asymmetric conflicts. His recent book, Reimagining India in the Geopolitics of the 21st Century, has been critically acclaimed for its theme and content. Besides this, he has 4 books in the pipeline. He is currently heading a major research project sponsored by ICSSR and has been a visiting faculty to several HRDC centers, Naval Academy, Goa, and Karnataka Police Academy. Welcome, sir. Next, we have Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, Stockholm University, and Honorary Senior Fellow, Institute of South Asian Studies at National University of Singapore. His latest publications are Jinnah, His Successes, Failures, and Role in History, which won the English Non-Fiction Book Award for 2021 at the Valley of Words Literary Festival, Dehradun. His other books include Pakistan, The Garrison State, Origins, Evolution, Consequences, and the Punjab Bloodied, Partitioned, and Cleansed, which won the Best Non-Fiction Book Prize at the 2013 Karachi Literature Festival and the 2013 UBL Jung Group's Best Non-Fiction Book Prize at Lahore, and the Best Book on Punjab Award from Punjabi Prachar at the Vaisakhi Mela in Lahore 2016. Welcome, sir. We have Ahmed Walid Kakkar, who is an Afghan political analyst and commentator. He is the founder and the editor-in-chief of the Afghan Eye, an independent Afghan-led media platform that provides English language analysis and alternative perspectives on Afghan's politics, history, and society. The Afghan Eye also produces a podcast where he regularly discusses current affairs, regional geopolitics, and developments in Afghanistan. He also holds a master's from King's College, London. Finally, we have Arzu Safi, who is an Afghan-Australian lawyer admitted to the Supreme Court of New South Wales and the High Court of Australia. Her legal practice covers immigration, family, and criminal law, with a broader focus on issues intersecting law, national security, and governance. She is also a political commentator on Afghanistan and regional affairs, known for her advocacy of women's rights, accountability, and transparency. Her work strongly emphasizes democratic resilience, the rule of law, and the protection of civil liberties as essential responses to ideological extremism. Welcome, ma'am. Before I hand over the floor to Group Captain Srinivasan sir, I request the audience to turn off their microphones and post their questions in the chat box, which shall be taken up during the Q&A session. With this session, with this request, I request Srinivasan sir to take over for the session. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Priyanshu, and thank you, Yashash, and the Indic Research Forum for uh, inviting me to chair this session. It's indeed a great privilege. You don't get to chair sessions where there is a perfect combination of academic excellence and practitioner excellence. Two of the speakers in this session are distinguished academicians, and two others are distinguished practitioners. And I'm sure the audience would be more than eager to not only learn, to also absorb the insightful thoughts that they are about to share with us. I'll take about 2-3 minutes or maybe 5, okay, just to, because the moment we think of Afghanistan, 3 things come to our mind. Number one, we say great game, right from the colonial era. The second one we think is fanatical Islam. And the third thing that comes to our mind is marginalization of women. These are 3 things that just stand up before we even put an effort to think about Afghanistan any further. But are these 3 things what define Afghanistan? Do they define Afghanistan? That's a question for which I'm sure collectively all these distinguished panelists in this session would be attempting to answer, I suppose. I mean, the topics are such that you will get an answer. But then what is this Afghanistan that we are talking about? We are all familiar with the subcontinental civilization, which we trace it back to, we call it Indus Valley, but it's not strictly. We must call it actually Saraswati Valley civilization. And this Saraswati civilization sat at the junction, a very critical junction, where the ancient Silk Road, which connected Guangzhou and Xi'an in China to Anatolia and Greece and Italy, intersected with the trade routes that went up north from India, from Takshashila, from Meerut, from Mathura, and from down south also. It sat at that junction. And some of us who are students of history would also know that this very concept of religion, because we talk about Afghanistan as a fundamentalist Islamic state. But what is this fundamentalist, or what is this religion? And it is a matter of history that Zoroaster, who lived approximately 2,600 years before Christ, is credited to be the founder of the concept of religion, because he brought in 4 important cardinal principles: God and Satan. I'm just using an English word. Okay. And then he brought in the concept of good and evil. And therefore, he brought in the concept of reward and punishment. And therefore, the concept of heaven and hell and the judgment. It is for Zoroaster's credit that religions became defined as religions, because you take any religion across the world, the Abrahamic religions or the Hindu or Buddhist or anything you take, you will find that these are the core cardinal principles. There is a God and there is a Satan, call him by whatever name. Okay. There is good and evil. There is reward and punishment, pap or punya, to put it in Indian, in the Indian way. And of course, the judgment, karma. Okay. So, the very origin of the concept of religion was what you call today as Afghanistan. And then one more interesting thing comes out to your mind, that we say that out of the 3 things, it's a fundamentalist Islamic state, and more so because Taliban is ruling it, where women are marginalized, where they are not allowed to go for education. But do we really know what Quran says about seeking knowledge? Quran places the highest duty as one of the highest duties of every Muslim to seek knowledge. And if women are Muslim, I don't see any reason why anybody should restrict it. If they're not Muslim, then thank you so much. They're not Muslim, they can pursue studies in any case. But if they are Muslim, Islam ordains them to seek knowledge. Okay. Therefore, what we see as these three things that are trying to sort of portray what Afghanistan is, they are a political construct. They've been constructed by Western thoughts who are quite unfamiliar with the teachings of this side of the world of religions, who are unfamiliar with how women have been treated or women have been allowed to function. In fact, in India, in Hindu households, it's not uncommon, millions of households do it. You will find that in the monthly cycle, I'm sure all of you know what women's monthly cycles are. Okay, in those 3 or 4 days, women are expected to stay away in a separate room or in a separate corner of the house, because that time they are considered as unclean. But do you know where this practice comes from? It comes from the Chitral Valley. It is the people of the Chitral Valley who have a distinct practice which stretches some 2000 or 2600 or 3000 years before Christ, who still have the same practice. Okay. So, the Saraswati civilization was a great connect. It borrowed liberally. It formulated, it used concepts, precepts, whichever term we want to use. Okay, it was a great connected civilization. And as one of the speakers in the opening session mentioned, that Pakistan was a British construct and therefore Afghanistan was also a British construct. They needed it as a buffer state against the expanding Tsarist Russian influence. And we do call it as a graveyard of empires, because right from the so-called Alexander Great to the USSR, to the USA, to God knows everyone else has tried to occupy, and Pakistan is also attempting it right now. They have tried to occupy, they have tried to subjugate. But one point which Honorable N.J. Akbar brought up, we must remember, is nationalism or love for their land or love for their clan affinity runs so deep in Afghanistan, and that is one of the primary factors why they have not been subjugated. Of course, they have been subjected to us, but they have not been subjugated. The spirit of Afghanistan is alive, and it has always been alive for thousands of years now. You may like to give it an Islamic color today because Taliban is sitting there. Tomorrow somebody else might sit there. The color will be different, but they are only colors. That is not a reflection of what is deep within. Okay. Therefore, Afghanistan calls for a lot of understanding, both from the perspective of history, both from the perspective of religion, also from the perspectives of contemporary world politics. The contemporary world politics is symptomatic. The root causes are elsewhere. So unless we understand history and understand society and its culture and its traditions, we can never really find a true answer to any of the problems that we see manifest around us in the world. And I personally feel, I'm again saying that it's a great privilege for me to chair this session where all these factors are going to be discussed. All this will be deliberated by esteemed professors and practitioners, and their perspectives will help us understand Afghanistan better and therefore pave way for building stronger relationships with Afghanistan and India. Okay. So saying, I would like to open the session by first inviting Dr. Nanda Kishor. I suppose Priyanshu is going to give a brief introduction of Dr. Nanda. Oh, you have already given. I'm sorry. Okay, I would like to call Dr. Nanda Kishor who's a professor at Pondicherry University, to talk about Deoband beyond borders, which is a very, very important perspective for us to attempt to understand Afghanistan. Dr. Kishor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Srinivasan. My thanks also goes to Yashes and his whole team, including Mr. Pandey, all my fellow colleagues on the panel. This is lovely to be here. It's been a while. I haven't spoken about this, but we had, even in the previous one of the editions, we had spoken about this one. It's an exemplarily important, thought that is associated. Now, without wasting much time, the type of background that was required was given already by Dr. Srinivasan. I appreciate the deep thought that comes from his personal experience and also the amount of readings that he has done, spending all his life for more than 30 years in the service. All said and done, now, when Deoband enters actually the contemporary discussion, whether it is on, let's say, security, whether it is about extremism, or for that matter, just any matter in South Asia, it is essentially or often invoked as some sort of a shorthand rather than understood as a historical tradition. Now, the name is usually used actually very loosely to describe everything from, let's say, a conservative religious education to militant jihadism, collapsing what we call as a very complex intellectual lineage into some sort of a single ideological label. That's not something that it represents if you go deep into and try understanding this scenario. Now, this reduction, what it also does is it obscures more than what it reveals. Because Deoband is not just a place that is first and foremost component, nor it is synonym with some sort of a monolithic worldview. It essentially represents a portable religious intellectual tradition that travels across borders, adapted to different political environments, and what it has produced over a period of time, essentially sharply divergent outcomes in India and Afghanistan. Now, to understand India-Afghanistan relations in the modern era, one must actually move beyond just the caricature of Deobandi thought, but also to examine it, how it interacted with colonialism, war, displacement, state collapse. It has manufactured itself in different ways over a period of time. Now, the origins of Deobandi, many of you also are aware that it happened in the late 19th century, northern part of India, particularly around the seminary that later came to be known as the Darul Uloom Deoband. This is how it is spoken about. Now, this particular institution emerged in the aftermath of what we called as the failed uprising or First War of Independence, whichever we would want to call it, 1857, at a moment actually when the Muslim elites were grappling with political defeat because the Mughals were troubled in that way. Cultural marginalization, that was another major concern that Islam has gone through in different parts of the world. And then the overwhelming power of the British colonial rule. They had to manage with all these things because monolithic religions, monotheistic religions generally fear anything that also comes with the idea of the modernity. And they have to grapple with that one. They have to make sure that it stays intact because that is the way they have preserved themselves for a very long time. Now, what they ended up doing was, as a response to the whole thing, Deobandi scholars, what they did not do was to give a call for some sort of an immediate rebellion or anything of that sort, but for typically a way of preserving religious knowledge, disciplining social life, and also insulating the community from cultural erosion. Now, they had to come up with something really new. They could not essentially go back to Wahhab, the way Wahhab did it in Saudi Arabia, something that is more unique and region specific that they had to do. And this had to be very, very, customized sort of a scenario that they were imagining about. Now, the strategy was defensive, certainly not offensive in the initial stage. And also they wanted to keep it long-term rather than just making it revolutionary, knowing the type of response that would come from the British. Now, one senior scholar at some point of time reported to have told his students that losing political power was survivable, but losing knowledge was not, something that they had to preserve. Now, this emphasis on moral authority over political authority shaped the whole thing that we see as a Deobandi attitude to power. in profound ways. That's why this is being spoken even in 2026, the sort of footprint that they've had so far. Now, this original political imagination of the Deoband was not anti-colonial, but and also at the same time was not anti-plural. Let me be very clear on that front. Because Deobandi scholars opposed the British rule, but many of them believed that the Muslims could coexist with non-Muslims only given that they share a political space if religious autonomy was protected. That's exactly what they wanted. Nothing more than that one. Now, this outlook later translated into what we call as support for composite nationalism among several prominent Deoband figures during the freedom struggle itself. Critically, Deoband did not develop as a theory of state power. That's something that many of them tend to get confused about. But they wanted to create a theory of the community because they understood once you have a strong community, creating a state out of that one was not at all difficult because there is no difference between political Islam and the spiritual Islam or religious Islam. It's all same. It traverses through all modes in one or the other way. And they were very, very clear about it. The strategy was simple, that to make sure that they will come up with something that will be required for the community survival under hostile condition. Now, this distinction is essential for the simple reason, because when Deobandi thought later traveled to places like Afghanistan, it entered as an environment that shaped not by colonial governance, but by chronic instability, weaker institution, eventually even total war. This is the idea that comes in here. Now, the transmission of Deobandi ideas to Afghanistan occurred very quietly and gradually through educational networks rather than essential political movement. That's why tracing them to political movements will only mislead us. We generally think that this is how these have all traveled, because Afghan clerics traveled to North India for religious training in the early decades. Even now we saw one of them who came here, one of the things that he kept asking was that I want to visit Deobandi. Even in the Taliban regime, if you look in, that's the sort of connection that we need to make, because they, when they wanted to go with the textualist approach to Islam, an emphasis on the discipline and deep suspicion for foreign domination, in Afghanistan, however, these ideas encountered very, very different social ecology, unlike India, because the Afghan state was fragile, tribal structures were strong, and they continue to be strong even today. The boundary between religious authority and political power was far more porous than the way we imagine here. Now, a revealing anecdote, if you ask me, from the 1930s captures this particular difference. An Afghan cleric trained in India reportedly declined a government position in Kabul, remarking that the state government bodies, while the madrasas governed conscience, the thought was very, very clear that I will continue to be part of the madrasa rather than just trying to be part of some sort of a state government body. I will not be part of that. Now, this statement reflects a lingering separation between religious authority and state power, where they want to stay at a place where nobody can touch them, but yet have such control over the political party itself. Because this particular separation that I'm talking about did not succeed for a long time. That's a different issue, because it had to go through a lot of upheaval, very specifically the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 79, because there where the civilizational rupture happened. It was so easy for the radical clerics to put this across, because they simply said, people who are non-believers, how dare they come and touch believers? You know, what more you require? That's the best way to bring your community together, even if they had their own issues and other things. Because what had been a scholarly and pedagogical tradition, just after this particular instance in 79, it thrust itself into a context of existential war. Deobandi jurisprudence, which in India had evolved over conditions of relative social mobility despite colonial domination, was militarized under pressures of invasion, displacement, and also foreign patronage. Now, foreign occupation has been one of the strongest tools for jihad, because absolutely you will get clarity and absolutely you will get clearance from any cleric. No cleric would ever would say, don't do this one. This is against, or this should not be done. In fact, it's the other way around. If you don't, then only you're abused, or then you're called as a non-Muslim. Now, clerics became commanders, madrasas became recruitment centers, and also ethical restraints were steadily eroded by the demands of survival and victory. That's an adaptation that they did. Now, Afghan elders later recalled that many local scholars were deeply uncomfortable with this influx of foreign fighters whom they saw as some sort of, let's say, undisciplined, contemptuous to Afghan customs. But they just they did not have a possibility to sustain. Now, yet war rewarded ruthlessness rather than reflection. Now, those voices were marginalized and silenced. Those who thought that there was an erosion to Afghan culture and other things. Now, this period also, witnessed what we call as the transformation of jihad from a contextual religious duty into a globalized ideology of violence. Afghanistan became the crucible in which this transformation occurred. Deobandi concepts were simplified, sloganized, and even stripped of their jurisprudential caution. The ethical debate that had once constrained violence overwhelmed by geopolitical interests and logistical imperatives, those were much more important now. Getting rid of Soviet Union, which was also called as a superpower, was much more important. So training camps replaced classrooms, and authority flowed increasingly from guns rather than scholarship, which they continue to do even today. From where do they get all these ideas? If you ask me, somebody will essentially end up saying this is from so-and-so Hadish and this is so-and-so from some sort of a school, but that doesn't give any authority for them to push across. Now, the consequences of this particular shift extended far beyond Afghanistan, shaping the whole of military network in the South Asia itself. And it has even gone beyond South Asia. Let me be clear about it. Now, it is in this particular context, we see the emergence of the Taliban that has to be understood from keeping Deobandi in the mind. Because the Taliban are frequently described as Deobandi, and doctrinally, this is not purely incorrect. That's what I'm trying to say. Because treating them as a direct extension of Deoband is conceptually misleading. I agree on that part, but the Taliban represents what we call as some sort of a mutation of Deobandi thought produced by three powerful distortions. One, prolonged war trauma. Second, socialization in refugee camps. And three, systematic manipulation by intelligence agencies. So it's a handiwork of multiple components here. Now, what survived in Taliban practice was not the intellectual depth of Deobandi scholarship, but its disciplinary shell. Because this essentially got illustrated by a striking anecdote from Kandahar. Let's say, for example, in the mid-90s, when a Taliban commander reportedly punished a fighter for reciting poetry in public by declaring it as un-Islamic. Now, classical Deobandi scholars in India, by contrast, routinely used Persian and Urdu poetry in sermons and moral instructions. That's why there are some divergence component here. Now, the difference was not the theology alone, but the social world in which the theology was embedded. Because Afghan people were much easier to, manipulate than that of the Indians. Now, this divergence between Indian and Afghan trajectories of Deobandi thought had significant implications for the India-Afghanistan relation itself. Unlike Pakistan or Afghanistan, who retained, let's say, Deobandi institutions within a plural constitutional framework, India came as a very, very important example, because Indian Deobandi scholars largely rejected violent revolution, theocratic governance, and also perpetual jihad, because they had to live with a democratic state that declared itself as a democratic state. Otherwise, they had to leave the country. This was the issue that they had. Now, all said and done, during the Afghan jihad, several Indian critics actually privately warned the militarizing faith that would ultimately devastate the Muslim society itself. But this warning wasn't heard, and they highlighted the importance of the paradox itself. Now, India became a space where Deobandi restraint survived, while Afghanistan became a space where Deobandi radicalization, in fact, flourished. And 2001, that's why somebody's crisis is somebody's opportunity. The 2001 crisis in the United States just gave rise to a different type of situation altogether, enabling cooperation through development and state building, but limiting meaningful engagement with clerical networks, and also had become deeply politicized and also got securitized. In the post-2001, if you look in, approach to Afghanistan reflected what we call as an implicit understanding of this particular reality, but rather than seeking influence through religious or ideological channels, India focused on infrastructure, education, and governance, roads, dams, lot of things we started doing it. But all said and done, one of the Afghan scholars who actually visited, he came, or I rather put it that when Indian visitors met in 2001, he said, "You still have Deoband, we lost ours in the war." This is a profound statement that he made. The statement was less about an institution and more about loss of an ethical tradition that had once restrained violence itself. Today, what they are struggling is the distorted version of that particular Deoband that they're talking. Let me cite a few examples or anecdotes where the Deoband has played that sort of a role. If you look in the early 20th century, an Afghan emir facing pressure from both British India and the Tsarist Russia discreetly sought religious opinions from scholars associated with the Deoband itself. Instead of asking about jihad or war, his query focused on whether accepting limited diplomatic engagement with non-Muslim powers constituted what we call as moral compromise. Now, the response emphasized necessity, this is darura, or restraint along with that, not confrontation. Now, this particular episode where they sought, or they consulted the Deoband, essentially reveals that early Afghan engagement Deoband sought with was some sort of a pragmatic, state-conscious one, not a revolutionary one. That's point number one. Second is when several Afghan students studying in Deoband before the independence later essentially recalled that senior Indian scholars explicitly discouraged them from seeking political office upon returning home. One teacher reportedly said that in weak states, the clerics who seek power becomes a soldier, not a guide. Ironically, many of these students would later be forced into politics by war, highlighting the tragic invasion of Deobandi advice in Afghanistan itself. In 1920, if you look in, Afghan tribal leaders sought religious endorsement from Deobandi trained clerics for armed conflicts with rival tribes. A prominent cleric, in fact, at that particular point of time also refused, arguing that tribal war disguised as religious duty would hollow out Islam from the within. But this particular refusal cost him patronage as well as protection. But what it shows is that Deobandi jurisprudence initially acted as a brake on violence rather than accelerating because of the type of complications that are associated with so many tribes. How much time do I have, Dr. Srinivasan?
Dr. Kishor, maybe two more minutes. That's
sure, sir. Not at all an issue. When I say this, if you just perhaps I'll bring that together. Now today, Deobandi thought operates across borders in multiple forms. Otherwise, I had quite a few examples that I could have cited. In India, it largely remains scholarly and institutional, constrained by constitutional norms and social diversity. Because otherwise, they will be thrown out from here. We have seen every now and then try to mushroom or come up with other organizations, how Indian state has operated over a period of time. More so in the last, let's say, 11, 12 years, I don't think they've had that sort of a chance at all. But in Afghanistan, it exists in a militarized form shaped by decades of conflict. In refugee and diaspora spaces, hybrid forms have emerged, blending elements of both of these components. Now, India's strategic discourse has often failed to distinguish between these variants, treating Deobandi Islam as some sort of a single transformational thread or transnational thread rather than a fragmented intellectual tradition that's shaped by the context itself. Now, that's way, in Indian context, we manage things in a much better way. Understanding Deoband beyond borders thus requires a typical shift in analytical perspective. Deobandi thought did not inevitably lead to extremism, but it was bent and broken by war, displacement, and geopolitical manipulation. Now, India's relationship itself with Deobandi Islam is not a liability, but a potential strategic asset, precisely because it demonstrates how religious traditions can coexist with pluralism as well as restraint. Now, rebuilding India-Afghanistan relation for the future with the given type of conditions that we have, the force that is sitting there, which believes in all sorts of things, every now and then you will see them doing something or the other, will require typical engagement not only with states and armed groups, but also with religious intellectual tradition, approached without fear, as well as at the same time, and one should not also take it to the extreme romanticism that these are all peace lovers or anything of that sort. Certainly not. At the end of the day, there will be something apocalyptic that one has to be super clear about. That's something will come back and forth. But the story of the Deoband beyond borders ultimately offers a very, very broad lesson for international relations. Ideas travel, but they do not travel unchanged. The perversions always happen. They're shaped by the environments they enter, amplified by violence, and also distorted by power, because power has the capacity to corrupt the most pious people. And that's what religion is capable of doing at times when it's unchecked. Now, Afghanistan did not merely export insecurity, but it also absorbed and transformed ideas under conditions of extreme stress. Now, India's task is not to erase Deoband from strategic conversations. That's not going to happen, nor to conflate it with militancy, but to understand what was lost when a tradition of restraint crossed into the furrows of war itself. And now such an understanding is indispensable for any serious rethinking, because anything that we touch will lead to something else. That's a problem here. But as in other places, there are greater violent traditions. Some of this is not getting exported to, but it has a capacity to shape the whole South Asian security scenario. And this is very important, keeping the region's future in mind. And without unchecked, this has a capacity to even give ideas to some of the organizations which dream, as I use the word quote unquote apocalyptic, that one day we also might be in a position to take over, like the Afghanistan scenario now, the way Taliban has taken over a state. I'll stop it perhaps here and then look forward to questions in the later stage. Thank you.
Yeah. That's a very amazing take on Deoband and its further implications, but I will use some kind of insights from your talk and the talks of other this thing at the end. For now, we will carry on with the next speaker. I'm not sure if Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed has joined. Has he?
No, sir. I think he will be joining because he had a long flight. So
no issue. I understand that. Do we also? I mean, I think Walid Khakkar is also not there.
yeah, he is joining. In the meantime, we can have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Don't worry. I'll take. So while we are waiting for two more of our panelists to join us, it's my pleasure to request Arezu Safi to talk to us about the politics of Afghan Jihad. Perhaps by coincidence, this should be in continuation of what Professor Nanda Kishor has just talked about. So I, along with the audience, are eagerly looking forward to listening to you, Arezu Safi. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Dr. and distinguished chair and colleagues. It's an honor to speak at this dialogue in the presence of very esteemed individuals on an issue that remains central to regional security. Afghanistan is often described as a conflict, but it is under ideology, geopolitics. From my work as a Afghan Australian lawyer in governance and national security, there is this one pattern that is quite clear. When institutions weaken, ideology becomes political and instability spreads beyond borders. For India, Afghanistan is directly linked to regional stability and counterterrorism. Today, I'll cover three key points. Number one, how jihad changed from resistance into a geopolitical tool. Number two, how proxy warfare weakened state institutions. And number three, how identity politics affects long-term stability. The concept of jihad in Afghanistan underwent a significant transformation during the late 20th century. During the Soviet-backed regime, jihad was largely functioning as a defense mobilization framework grounded in sovereignty and identity. However, as external actors entered that ecosystem, ideological mobilization gradually embedded within the geopolitical competition. Financial networks, recruitment pipelines, and transnational messaging converted what had locally been rooted as a resistant movement into a structured geopolitical infrastructure. Over time, legitimacy became shifting away from institutions towards armed ideological actors. This shift continues to shape Afghanistan's political environment today, including under the governance framework of Taliban. The key lesson here is structural, that ideological conflicts rarely remain ideological when they become institutional, when governance collapses. In terms of proxy warfare and state fragmentation, Afghanistan obviously remains one of the clearest examples of how proxy warfare reshapes state formation. regional competition, often pursued through non-state actors, rather than direct interstate engagement, alters Afghanistan's political incentives. External sponsorship frequently rewarded tactical alignment rather than government's capacity. The three structural consequences followed: fragmentation of central authority, conflict sustainability through external funding flows, and the ideological amplification as a recruitment tool. Militant ecosystems, obviously associated with Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, demonstrated how conflict infrastructures transcend territorial boundaries when embedded within the proxy architecture. So for India, Afghanistan is not merely a diplomatic arena, but a structural security variable. Proxy warfare may generate short-term leverage, but it consistently produces long-term regional instability. Third point is political identity and governance. So a critical distinction must be maintained between religion as a faith system and religion as a governance instrument. Historically, Afghanistan was not uniformly categorized as a religious conservative country. There was a period when Kabul was often described as the Paris of South Asia, reflecting the modern influence education systems, fashion and urban development. This phase obviously proved to be short-lived because religion increasingly became politicized and at times instrument as a social control. Governance tends to weaken when religious legitimacy constitutes accountability and rule-based state structures. So no governance model, religious or circular, produces durable stability when institution remains weak. So for a rule of law perspective, sustainable governance requires institutional legitimacy, legal accountability, and administrative functionality. So we've seen that ideology alone cannot govern a country, as in the current situation. Obviously, one of India's most strategic or important strategies in Afghanistan has been the development-led capacity building. Instead of proxies, India has invested in infrastructure and education, including the Salma Dam or the Chahabar Port, I hope I'm saying it properly. This obviously reflects a modern security idea because development is security and infrastructures builds institutional strength rather than ideological dependence. So while much discussion focuses on the extremism, and equally important consideration for long-term stability is domestic ideological cohesion within states themselves. Globally, identity politics, religious, cultural is becoming more politically influential. So in India right now, analysts often discuss the role of the BJP party, the governing ecosystem linked to India. This should be viewed as analytical and not political. Then the two key structure points is that strong institutions are necessary to prevent ideological polarization from weakening social cohesion. Political narratives in one country can obviously influence fragile regions like Afghanistan. Of course, this is not about comparing democratic politics with the extremism. It highlights just a broader principle that strong institutions reduce radical risks, and India's constitutional system remains central to maintaining that balance. Now, we often ask, and we're all here to give our precious time to this dialogue, that why Afghanistan remains relevant for India. Afghanistan affects India across 4 areas: counterterrorism, regional connectivity, strategic balance, and ideological spillover. So weak governance risks are not just military regrouping, but for India, obviously Afghanistan remains a strategic issue than a geographical one. So I guess what, in my humble opinion, looking forward, the 3 policies that remain critical would be policy directions. For example, institutional support, continue supporting education and governance systems, regional intelligence cooperation, modern threats are networked and require coordinated responses, and the continued development. So India's credibility comes from the development, not proxies. And of course, that is just one aspect of why these two countries are good friends, and a friendly neighbor approach has been done over the last couple of decades. So I think what Afghanistan's modern history shows one clear lesson, that conflicts are rarely driven by ideology alone. They're sustained by power competition, external support, and weak institutions. The evolution of Jihad in Afghanistan demonstrates how religious narratives can reshape religious security when tied to proxy politics. The real challenge for the region, including in India, is strengthening those institutions while preventing ideological division within the country as well. I guess Afghanistan's future is not going to depend on ideology alone, but whether the institutions become stronger than armed movements. And it's been a privilege. I've kept my speech short. I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to the discussion.
Oh, thank you, Aliza Sophie. In fact, it was short but to the point with a lot of takeaways. I will, again, as I told Dr. Nanda, Kishor, I'll summarize some highlights at the end. But now I think it is my pleasure to request Ahmad Walid Kaka to take the floor and talk to us about Afghanistan and the Islamic Emirate. Walid Kaka, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's morning where I am. It's the afternoon, I'm sure in India. It's good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My warmest greetings. First of all, thank you to all of the admins for convening this dialogue. Apologies for joining slightly late. I've been traveling and just it was a bit difficult to get a stable internet connection in place, but we are where we are. And my bad luck is also that I'd actually prepared a couple of slides, but unfortunately my Outlook expired today. So I'm unable to display those, but nonetheless, I'll proceed obviously within the time that's been allocated to me and focus on a couple of key points, because the topic that I've been asked to contribute on is one that I'm sure most of you would agree, one that anyone could discuss for hours on end, because there is so much to discuss, especially with a country like Afghanistan and a movement as multifaceted, I guess you could say, with loads of different political currents running through it, like the Taliban. But in any case, I digress. And the topic that I've been asked to discuss is Decode Afghanistan under the Islamic Emirate and Decoding the Taliban 2.0. Implicit in that title is the recognition or assumption that there is a Taliban 1.0, and as a result, there's a Taliban 2.0, which many would find controversial. But for the purposes of our discussion, I think it is it's a recognition that is sound. And so there are a couple of key, as I guess we could say, features characterizing Afghanistan in its current trajectory under the Taliban's governance. So number one is the fact that there has been a centralization of power, which is unprecedented, not just in Afghan history, we had centralized power, but the power that was centralized was not very comprehensive, it was not encompassing, and it could not exert itself into the villages, the districts, and the townships. So what we have in Afghanistan is centralized power, but also power that is able to exert itself and sort of have sway over the countryside, which for the almost entirety of our modern history has been anathema. It's also unprecedented from the Taliban's perspective, because the Taliban, during the course of the US occupation, just, I guess you could say, by virtue of the fact that it was a military campaign, it was an insurgency being waged, a centralized form of organization and leadership would have been counterproductive from the military perspective. Therefore, the organizational structure that was put in place, which of course evolved over time during the occupation, was one that we could say was polycentric. So you had a number of shuras or councils. Infamously, you had the Quetta Shura and what were called the Miran Shah Shuras and the Peshawar Shuras. And I think it would be perhaps a mistake to assume that these were fixed spatial temporal shuras where there was a certain amount, the number of members at a given time at a given place, but roughly speaking, where the chains of commands of these shuras went. And within that framework, you had what was called the Rahbari Shura, or the Leadership Council, the head of which obviously sat the Emir, and he had 2 or 3 deputies, and the deputies were, of course, selected, viewing sort of the balancing of different factions and different groupings within the Taliban, and you had the other council members. As of right now, there is no Rahbari Shura, which is, I guess you could say, it also reflects an evolution of the Taliban from an insurgency more toward the state actor, because it's not like in other countries where there's a parallel state in addition to the administrative state. The Rahbari Shura in the insurgency sense has been dissolved, and what you have now is a cabinet in Kabul. The downside of that, of course, is that the centralization of power has not taken place in Kabul, it has taken place in Kandahar. And the cabinet in Kabul is subordinate to Kandahar, where the Emir is based. As a result of that, sort of figures like Sirajuddin Haqqani, figures like Maulawi Yaqub, and so on, who previously held the portfolios of being deputy emirs, were also unfortunate, well, I guess you could say unfortunately, from the sense of the diffusion of power, those positions have been dissolved. So currently speaking, there is no Emir. And what that means is that the reliance or the way in which authority has been exerted is a very classical Islamic model, one we could say, which is pre-modern, in which the Emir relies on the religious legitimacy and authority of his person to induce obedience within his followers. And this obviously goes to a very lengthy discussion in Islamic theology, where those in charge are given authority and those over whom authority is exerted with conditions are expected to obey. And so I think that is fundamentally the key pillar undergirding the post-2021 setup, which is the fact that we've gone from polycentric model of leadership to an autocratic model of leadership. And the autocratic model of leadership is one that is expected to consult with other stakeholders and ministers in the cabinet and so on and so forth. However, has the prerogative to may consult them, but has the prerogative to override any of those decisions or any of those consultations. The elephant in the room, of course, is the issue of girls' education, in which there's been a lot of dissent, there's been a lot of opposition, open opposition from Taliban members, but on which there hasn't actually been much progress. And the legitimacy point of is in the, as the previous speaker highlighted, in an ideological sort of setup, what tends to happen is that real practical results and practical policies tend to be superseded by moral, ideological points of legitimacy. And it would not be an exaggeration to say that that legitimacy that the Emir and the entire government by extension derives itself from is based on implementing policies that are seen as Islamic. But of course, Islamic policies are not a monolith. They do not come in one shape or size. They can take many different permutations. But what tends to happen is that the particular flavor that is chosen is one that aggrieves Western audiences. And because it aggrieves Western audiences, that in and of itself can be seen as a barometer of legitimacy, which is to say, if the United States, Great Britain, and NATO disapprove of Afghan policies, it must mean that Afghan policies are authentically Islamic, because these are the countries that occupied us for 20 years. They have a stated ambition, or they had a stated ambition to uproot us and formulate a new secular order. And if they are upset, that by extension is legitimacy. And so it is as a result that many, I guess you could say counterproductively, the discourse that's emerged about Afghanistan from outside Afghanistan has been counterproductive, because issues such as, let's say, girls' education, before they're international issues or sticks with which Western policymakers like to beat the Taliban with, these are Afghan issues, these are domestic issues. And the more that these are led and seen to be led by people within Afghanistan, by Afghans, people who are obviously religious Afghans who can make those sorts of arguments, they're instead hijacked by, say, foreign policymakers or foreign-based activists who are not speaking in the language of local culture, etiquette, and custom, but they're speaking the language of freedom and democracy and human rights, against which the Taliban fought for 20 years. So we are stuck, Maya. And the final point that I'd like to make here is, all of this being said and acknowledged, there's often sort of a black and white understanding where it's seen that sort of the Western model or understanding of women's rights, or more broadly speaking, modern governance, and the Taliban's understanding are fundamental and polar opposites, and they cannot exist in harmony. But at the same time, and I guess at the risk of sounding somewhat audacious, one could say Taliban would definitely not share such a description of themselves or have this view of themselves. But with regard to many specific policies, one could say from a Western perspective, they are perhaps the most feminist government that has existed in Afghanistan. And the reason I say that it's a loaded statement is the fact that policies such as giving women their dowry, preventing them from being exchanged in marriage over in tribal or village feuds, preventing them from being forced into marriage, whether it be to strangers or to their brothers-in-law once they become widows. These are policies that Afghan governments, going back to the late 19th century, have tried and failed to implement. The only government that has in the modern period been able not just to enshrine such policies, but also to implement them meaningfully has been the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, or the Taliban 2.0. And this is a very important point here, because whilst I said that legitimacy is derived to an extent from Western antipathy toward the government, it's also, this reality is reflective of the fact that morality, as the Taliban see it, is not one that confines itself to women wearing the hijab or men growing their beards. The entire project, what is motivating this governance setup, is the attempt to create a moral structure. And a moral government is one that in which men are encouraged to grow their beards, women are encouraged to wear the hijabs, but where nepotism is also fought, where forced marriages do not take place, and so on and so forth. So it's a utopian vision of government and society, undoubtedly, but one that is much more multifaceted and comprehensive than many sort of Western headlines would give credit for. And finally, in highlighting the antipathy towards the outside world and the reluctance to take guidance from the outside world, this unfortunately also applies to fellow Islamic countries who tried to sway them or to make certain arguments, and even apply, I mean, right now we're talking about, I guess we could say there's quite a lot going on between Afghanistan and Pakistan, but relative to the first Taliban government, there's a lot more reticent to take guidance from Pakistan. And this is due to a number of factors, due to the role that Pakistan played during the course of the US occupation, due to the fact that it's seen as duplicitous, and the fact that it may have certain issues, it may have issues with Afghan foreign relations. But it's also worth noting that Pakistan is not the cause of all of Afghanistan's problems. So I know the previous speaker spoke about Deoband in India. When Mufti Taqi Osmani writes to the Emir, urging him to open girls' schools and to perhaps take a different view in light of Islamic jurisprudence with regard to women's participation in public life, it's unfortunate that the Emir does not listen to that, we could say. But I think I have spoken for, I more or less condensed my presentation, but unfortunately I wasn't able to display. But yeah, I'm happy to go on to the next speaker, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmad Walid Kaka. We will take the questions after the next speaker finishes his talk. And yeah, I must appreciate the insights that you have shared. I will summarize them at the end before we take on, after we take on the questions and answers. Right now, it's my privilege to invite Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, who has had a very long flight, but still made it a point to join us so that he could share his thoughts and perhaps provoke us into understanding Afghanistan and South Asia in a much better manner. Okay. He's going to talk to us on Bacha Khan, Pashtun nationalism, and the anti-colonial struggle. Okay. His insights are going to be valuable. Personally to me, because I consider myself as a student of history, and I'm sure the audience will gain much more than what he merely has to convey in this short duration of 15-16 minutes. Professor Ahmed, the floor is yours. Sir, you have to unmute. Please unmute, sir. We can't hear you, sir. You have to unmute. Yeah.
Now, can you?
Yes, sir, we can.
Lovely. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I did manage, I had a 24-hour sort of trip back from Lahore, but managed to sleep enough to say something which may make some sense, So I'm partly the way I am. Anyhow, thank you for the invitation. I've heard the previous speaker and was intrigued by what he said, but coming to Bacha Khan, Pashtun nationalism and the anti-colonial struggle shaping the modern states of India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. In the freedom struggle of the subcontinent, the friendship and comradeship of Mahatma Gandhi and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, popularly known as Bacha Khan, and it's as well as the frontier Gandhi is proverbial. Famously, when the two met, Gandhiji amusingly asked Bacha Khan, Khan Sahib, convincing Hindus to prefer non-violence as the strategy to oppose British imperialism was not difficult. How could you convince the warrior Pakhtuns or Pathans to adopt it too for your anti-imperialist red shirt movement? And that is amazing. What is going on now for a long terrorism, many cases of suicide bombers. This is such a tragic situation. And if Bacha Khan had been the leader, had been allowed to lead the Pakhtuns, maybe the future of the subcontinent would have been very, very different. But that did not suit the British. You see, The Pashtuns constitute an overwhelming majority of what is now known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but was originally called Northwest Frontier Province. And they are also the majority in Afghanistan, as well as the present government is entirely Pashtun dominated, that of the Taliban. Before all this, things started happening, between Afghanistan and the British who ruled the subcontinent, the Durand Line had been agreed, I think in 1883 or maybe 1893, between the Afghan ruler and Sir Mortimer Durand. And it becomes the international border between Afghanistan and British India. The border was porous, and many tribes moved across the border during winter. So it was not like a fixed international border, but something agreed to be sorted out later. I've argued elsewhere that the British had no intention of leaving the subcontinent. But when they had to do that, they had to choose between the Muslim League demanding a partition of India to create Pakistan, where Muslims were in a majority, which is the northwestern and northeastern zones of the subcontinent, through the partition of India on a religious basis. And the Indian National Congress, which wanted India to remain united, arguing that all Indians were part of the same nation. Whereas the Muslim League said Muslims were a nation in their own right by their faith. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the Khudai Khidmatgar, and the government in the Northwest Frontier, known as the Frontier Congress, they were vehemently opposed to them being placed in Pakistan. Although the Pashtuns were 94% Muslims, but from 1937 election onwards, they had always voted against the Muslim League, which wanted the partition of India. But now what happens is that already in the Punjab, violence had erupted on a large scale in March 1947. And on the 8th of March, the Indian National Congress had passed a resolution saying that they support the Sikh demand for the partition of Punjab. You see, in 1940, when the Muslim League demanded the partition of India on a religious basis, the Sikh leadership of Punjab said that we will never allow those parts of Punjab which have a Hindu Sikh majority become a part of Pakistan, Muslim Pakistan. And the Northwest Frontier government, led by the Frontier Congress, that is the Khudai Khidmatgar leader, elder brother of Bacha Khan, Dr. Khan Sahab, they also rejected them being placed in Pakistan. In the cabinet mission plan, they were placed in group B, which is Muslim majority provinces. Both the Sikhs and the Congress government of Northwest Frontier rejected them being placed in group B. But as we know, the cabinet mission plan was what the British wanted to all the parties to agree, which finally did not happen. And then Mountbatten comes and he decides that India has to be partitioned. To which the Frontier Congress, Bacha Khan, and the Khudai Khidmatgars, they opposed the 3 June partition plan. And so then Mountbatten arranged a referendum where the Khudai Khidmatgar or Bacha Khan, they wanted a choice between Pakhtunistan and Pakistan. You see, when it became clear that the British were going to partition India on the basis of religion, and the choice was India or Pakistan, the Indian National Frontier Congress wanted to be a part of a united India. But when the Congress party accepted the 3 June plan, now they were put in they were in a quandary what to do. So the idea that the choice in the Northwest Frontier province should be between Pakhtunistan and Pakistan was rejected by Mountbatten. The only choice they were given was either to be part of Pakistan or of India, which, for reasons which only Bacha Khan and his associates know, they decided to boycott the referendum. The referendum, as you know, only about 7% of the population of the Northwest Frontier had the right to vote. In the rest of India, it was about 10-11%. But when they boycotted it, the turnout was 51%, and almost all of them voted for Pakistan because the choice was either India or Pakistan. And they knew that the way they were going to draw the border, Northwest Frontier would not be, contiguous with India. So at that point, one had no choice, and Northwest Frontier became a part of Pakistan. What happened next was that there was an elected government in the Northwest Frontier province, which Jinnah ordered to be thrown out against all rules of parliamentary democracy. The governor, Sir George Cunningham, then carried it out, and the government of the Frontier Congress was dismissed, and a Muslim League government was imposed. Just to put on record, during the British period, Bacha Khan was in jail along with other Congress leaders. His years are counted to be 15 years. Bacha Khan was put in jail by the government of Pakistan for 18 years. So the longest person to suffer for what the British did in the end was Bacha Khan. Just to underline the situation, why did they want Pakistan finally, the British? Because in 1947, the British Army had come to the conclusion that an independent India under Jawaharlal Nehru and anti-imperialist, maybe socialist-oriented Indian leadership would not serve their purpose. So Pakistan was created as a frontline state to oppose what they thought was a Soviet advance towards towards the Indian subcontinent. So Pakistan was created to prevent a perceived threat from the Soviet Union. And you see, during the freedom struggle, this region where Bacha Khan was leading the Pakhtuns, they were opposed to British imperialist policies as much as the rest of the Congress party was, whereas the Muslim League had become their supporters once the Second World War had started. So now, even Mountbatten is grossly misunderstood. He wanted Pakistan to be a strong state, to be armed then with Islamic ideas to oppose the Soviet Union. So that's all that I can talk about Bacha Khan. I think he was a great leader. His vision was, I think, the right one, but for the British to leave India with the anti-imperialist forces ruling the subcontinent was unacceptable. So Pakistan was the frontline state created, and Afghanistan is the only government which opposed the admission of Pakistan in the United Nations. You see, Afghanistan had started supporting the idea of Pakhtunistan. Pakhtunistan idea came very late. that if we don't want to be part of Pakistan, if we can't be part of a united India, then we want Pakhtunistan. And the Afghan government started supporting this, I think, in June 1947. Very late, but Bacha Khan and his supporters had no choice. And so that's what I can tell you about this great man and his vision and his services. I'm ready for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed. Before I ask the audience to share their perspectives or questions, I have one more pleasure in inviting a colleague of yours, I believe so, Sangar Paikar, who is in the audience. And I believe he has tons of exposure to the ideology of Taliban, and that is something which the audience would obviously like to. So may I request Sangar Paikar to take about 5 minutes, sir, if you don't mind. Okay, but we would love to hear you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be among esteemed scholars and experts, and to answer the specific question that was asked. The Taliban movement, as one of our previous guests so eloquently explained, are influenced by Deobandi thought to an extent, but I would argue that Deobandi thought is one of many different ideologies that are part of the broader Taliban palette of ideas and influences. Essentially, Taliban as a movement, as a human organization, they are influenced by internal and external ideas. So if we just focus on the external ideas, we would say that throughout the last 2 centuries, the colonialism and other factors in the Muslim world have given birth to ideologies such as the Muslim Brotherhood, the Deobandism, and other such ideologies. And these ideologies have been adopted in different parts of the Muslim world by different groups and then reinterpreted into local context. And aside from the external influences, we have internal factors as well. So the Taliban are essentially an embodiment of the conservative rural Afghan religious authority. Since Afghanistan, and I argue this on any platform when I speak, since Afghanistan has not fully experienced modernity, in the sense that Afghanistan has not been industrialized, there are no elaborate systems of roads, infrastructure that facilitate modernity. We have not fully experienced that yet. Socially, we are also not a modern nation and a modern state, and thus Afghanistan has not been homogenized, because all modern societies have experienced a gradual process of homogenization of language, culture, spelling, even other matters. Like, for example, in Afghanistan, the Pashto language, as we speak Pashto in different dialects, the written Pashto is still not really standardized. So, for example, if someone is from Kandahar, they spell the same words slightly differently than someone who is from Kabul, like myself. So, as we have not experienced full modernization and modernity in Afghanistan, and we are a society that is still to an extent in a pre-modern context, the Taliban are essentially an organization that are shaped by those traditions in Afghanistan that existed for centuries in rural communities. So in Afghanistan, we had the traditional order where there is a Malik, or a local chief of a rural community, and then there is a religious authority there, but there is a hierarchy. So in Afghanistan, because there was no centralized government, there was a convergence of different forces in every community. So the Malik, the local community leader, would have some political influence, but the moral aspects of the society or community was informed by what the religious leader had to say. Now, due to the conflict that we have experienced in the past several decades, a number of things have happened. For example, when the communists took over in Afghanistan in the late 70s and early 80s, what they did is they tried to eradicate all traditional structures. So they killed a lot of Maliks, tribal elders, community leaders. They killed a lot of religious figures, because they wanted to create a modern utopia, a modern socialist utopia. And when they tried to eradicate rural structures, social structures, a lot of people have emerged into a new context where they are basically a new status quo, and they're trying to preserve a tradition that has been basically destroyed, and they're trying to return to a social order that is no longer there. And the Taliban, to a large extent, what they're trying to do is return to a social order that has been uprooted due to the communist revolution, the displacement of millions of Afghans over the decades, two subsequent foreign occupations. And while all of that was happening, Afghanistan had also exposure to the outside world. Afghanistan had also exposure to internet, television, radio. So all these other factors have also shaped and influenced Afghan society. And right now, the Taliban, as an ideological movement, they have this tendency to return to a social order that no longer exists. But at the same time, they are reinterpreting a lot of factors of who we are and what we should be as they go. So we cannot pin them down as this movement with this set of ideas. It's constantly evolving. So one of the issues that is even evolving in front of our eyes is that the Taliban are increasingly identifying themselves as a nationalist movement, not in the sense that they identify with the romantic ideological or philosophical movement that has emerged from Europe, but in the current shape, the state of Afghanistan and its people and how they perceive themselves and the society could be essentially described as nationalist. And that's in a stark contrast to, let's say, other ideological movements that are aligned with them to an extent, like the Muslim Brotherhood or the Al-Qaeda movement or the Deobandis. So we see that they are basically creating a new ideology that is essentially Afghan and a 21st century ideology. And because of this very complex nature of their ideology, or who they are and how they see themselves, it is very important to have a dialogue with them and talk with them and try to understand how they see matters. So the relationship with India, for example, they do not see India through a very strict religious ideological framework. And likewise, they do not see Pakistan strictly through an ideological lens. Everything has a degree of ideology, but there are other matters. They're also thinking about realpolitik, and they see international relations to a realpolitik lens. And this is why the engagement that I have witnessed between India and Afghanistan in the last 4 years, in my opinion, is very fruitful, because for the first time we see a state emerging in Afghanistan that is capable of being, on the one hand, in search of its own identity and its own self-image, but at the same time engaging with the rest of the world. And in the beginning of my discussion, I explained that human organizations have the capability to be influenced by external and internal factors. Likewise, what the Taliban are going to be like and what Afghanistan is going to be like in the next few years is to an extent also dependent on its relationship with its neighbors. So a positive engagement based on mutual interest will have its positive effects on Afghanistan. Now, to wrap this up, I want to conclude with just one remark. Pakistan had the capability to have a lot of influence on Afghanistan. However, their relationship was not a positive and constructive relationship. And now that relationship has entirely turned into a toxic relationship. And this is why I believe that it is up to our neighbors, it is up to the international community and the rest of the world to choose which path they want to pursue in Afghanistan. If they pursue a constructive and mutually beneficial path, they can actually exert some positive influence on Afghanistan, and it can be beneficial for all sides. But if they pursue a relationship where they try to basically dictate what they want, they will meet the same fate as Pakistan is meeting. Thank you for your attention.
That's a wonderful, very crisp, but to the point, and you conveyed a very beautiful dimension to our existing understanding of Taliban. To say that Taliban is not what Taliban is, a fundamentalist, rigid organization, but it is actually taken on a path of self-discovery, in the process trying to refine its outreach to the world, is a very important point, and that's a plank on which the international community should work. I agree with you. Yeah, that's very nice. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions or comments to make, you're welcome. Before I summarize the main points of all the 5 speakers. Any questions? Any comments?
Yes, sir. So I'll take this for a while. So great comments all across, and loved the discussion. I have a few questions for almost everyone on the panel. I'll be putting them forward one by one, and we hope that we can have this discussion in a succinct manner so that every question is answered and we wrap up on time. Firstly, I would like to approach Dr. Nanda Kishor, if you're here.
I think so. Yeah, you should be here. You go ahead with the question in case it's open to.
Perfect. So Dr. Nanda Kishor gave a very anthropological idea of how Islam and Deobandi thought processes originate, and how the historical events that they experienced sort of influence their legitimacy of violence as well as opposition that they have, right? So Islam is one of the Abrahamic religions that has constantly faced opposition since its inception, be it from within its own society or through external religious or political units, right? So what I wanted to know was, do you think this constant opposition as well as this constant war with contemporary ideologies and religious states is the reason why there is a higher legitimacy of violence or a propensity of violence through for Islamic states within the Middle Eastern powers?
If Dr. Nanda Kishor is not here, if any of the other speakers would like to share their views, you're welcome. All right, okay. I think I will just give you one small explanation. It's not an answer. It's just an explanation. It's an add-on. somebody called Sayyid Qutb, whom we all know, is a great Egyptian scholar and leader. In my opinion, politicized the concept of jihad. Okay. He evolved it as a political tool because of whatever was happening in Egypt. It was not about the Islamic world per se. It's not about Muslims everywhere in the world, but he evolved it based on the conditions that prevailed in Egypt at that time. He evolved it as a political tool. And as we know, that political tools developed in any society, okay, are generously borrowed by others wherever it suits their political objectives. To say that Muslim societies or Islamic societies are naturally prone to violence is something which I personally strongly disagree. Okay. Haven't we seen the kind of violence, I'm talking historically, like, haven't we seen the kind of violence that was perpetrated because of the Crusades? Haven't we seen the kind of violence that was perpetrated in those 100 years wars in Europe, or 30-year war, or 7 years war, or God knows all those wars which were fought between France, Germany, Bavaria, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Britain? Were they absent of violence? Violence is part of human history. There is no religion here. Violence by itself is a religion. Okay, and it's a tool. It's a tool that anyone, a religion, a sect, a clan, would like to use, because they think that the threshold of peaceful settlement has been crossed, or there is no need for approaching the threshold also. You pick up the gun, the other party will listen. So, yes, sir, please, sir. I fundamentally differ with that view that Islamic countries are prone to violence. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Professor Ahmed, please.
Disagreeing with you, just adding to what you are saying. You see, some people have always been there advocating jihad and so on, but they were a free group in all Muslim societies. It's only after the Second World War, when the Cold War started, I think American foreign policy, advised by the British, I think at the bottom of all this you have the British hand, was that in Muslim societies there is no big middle class which could be advocating democracy. Therefore, in order to prevent the spread of secular, socialist, communist ideas in the Muslim world, you have to strengthen conservative Islamic forces. And actually, Sayyid Qutb read Maulana Maududi's book, Islam, Jihad fi Islam. I have dealt with it in great deal, at great length. I'm so tired, but I wanted to say something. So Qutb actually learns the lesson from what Maududi wrote, and then you find Ayatollah Khomeini also saying the same thing. All three advocate that jihad is mandated by Islam so that it spreads to the whole world. But it was British, or let's say Western support to this idea which made this, spread this idea in the Muslim world through the Afghan jihad. Until then, this idea was always there, but there was no patronage. It's only when the so-called Afghan jihad starts, and the CIA, the Americans, the Saudis, and Israelis are involved, even China was involved. I don't know why all of them funded this jihad. And after that, what Qutb was saying and Maududi was saying is now a belief held by elements in all Muslim societies. Even in India, I know there are people who subscribe to this idea. Although original Deobandi idea is not about jihad at all. They were in favor of a freedom struggle led by the Indian National Congress. They wanted India to remain united. Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madni and the Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Hind, which were Deobandis, and Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who was a pious Muslim, all of them believed in a peaceful path forwards. But come the Cold War, and Islam becomes a tool to ensure that in the Muslim world, progressive forces are not thriving and you get conservative Islam everywhere. And that was made possible in the Afghan Jihad. The idea came already in 1950s. There is a book by Horowitz, as Arming the Devil or something, where the whole details of this foreign policy against the Soviet Union was formulated.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for adding on to the perspective. You have one more question, I suppose?
Yes. So this question is to Arzu Safi ma'am, Ahmed Walid Kakkar sir, and Sangar Paikar sir. So you guys talked extensively about India and Afghanistan and their diplomatic relations. And India particularly has had a very incongruent relationship with Islamic states, right? Where we have had a very good relation with Saudi nations, and we are at crosses with Pakistan. We are close to Afghanistan, but we are also very congruently aligned with Israel, which has had backlashes from the Taliban perspective. So in all of this haywire situation, do you think that this incongruency in India's stance towards Islamic states, or the whole concept of Islam as a diplomatic identity itself, could be a thorn in India-Afghanistan relation later on? Or are both parties capable of removing the ideological boundary and maintaining this primarily as an economic and security transaction?
I think the question was addressed to the three of us.
Yes, sir.
I was waiting for the others to, and then
You can take the stage for sure.
Sure. So I think with regard to Pakistan specifically, I mean, I would say that, of course, the raison d'etre of Pakistan is one of the Islam, but as sort of equivocating between, I think India's standoff with Pakistan is much deeper than just one of religious sort of differences. With regard to the incongruence, I mean, fundamentally, it just reflects the fact that it's a multipolar world, and there'll be times in which Saudi and India will align, and India and Israel will align, and in the sort of the global setup in which China is also rising now, I think that's just inevitable that it will be the case. With regard to Afghanistan specifically, I think the decoupling of an economic and a political or diplomatic relationship would be something of a flaw to fall into, because Afghanistan, an economic relationship with Afghanistan and expanding that will by definition be political, because it will strengthen Afghanistan's leverage and position in Central Asia by alleviating it of dependence on Pakistan, and so on and so forth. So I think at this moment in time, it's just very important to recognize that, you know, Afghanistan and India have just about managed to mend, let's say, a frosty period, and they have an economic relationship with each other. And then later on, subsequently, things can change, because, I mean, things have changed a lot in Afghanistan as well. We've seen numerous governments over the past 4 decades. Also, things could change in India. I mean, India is a democracy, and let's say you have the BJP in power today, but they may not be in power forever. So at this moment in time, I think it's just important to focus on specific interests that outlast those of any ideological persuasions, and really use the economic basis, sort of use economic interaction as the basis through which relations can move forth. But I'll hand over to my fellow guests as well.
Yeah, that's a very precise take, provoking some more thoughts. I suppose our Arezu Sofi is slightly tied up in a professional situation. So if you have any more question, please go ahead. Priyanshu?
Sankar sir here wanted to say something.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead. Otherwise, I would like to just summarize, just drawing one important thought from each of the speakers. That's what I wanted to do.
Definitely. So we'll listen to
No other question
Sankar
or
sir
comment
here.
from the audience. The audience has any
Yeah,
question? or comment?
I don't see any questions from the audience yet. We'll listen to Sankar sir here, and then you can proceed with the summarization. Right?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I would just like to add that India, as far as I can see India as a nation state, has emerged after the colonial era as an entity that did not exist in the current shape or form before. So the idea of India as a nation state right now is, in essence, a response to colonialism, Western colonialism. And this is also why throughout the decades, while India recognized Israel, they were not always in favor of Israeli policies vis-a-vis Palestine. So the current government in India may have a relationship with Israel, but it doesn't mean that it's a constant. So while right now the situation in West Asia can be interpreted as very black and white, I would say to an extent we have to look at the broader picture. The dynamics of the geopolitical dynamics of the region may change, and this is also why I think that India will also could assume a different posture towards Israel, which will affect Indian relationship with the Islamic world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think there is some question which has come up in the chat box. Priyanshu? Would you like to read it? Or should I?
So
Okay,
you can definitely go ahead. Yeah.
This is open to all the speakers because probably our Sankar Paikar has already answered it, but still, since it has popped up in the chat box, I'll read it. Is India's engagement with Taliban 2.0 a shift from value-based diplomacy to pure realism? Is there any comment that any of the speakers would like to make? Notwithstanding that Sankar Paikar has already indirectly answered this question even before it came up. But yes, Kakar Sahab, would you like to?
I mean, I would just say that we need to define which values we're picking at the expense of others, because are India's values nationalism and sovereignty? If that is the case, then the Taliban are actually better partners than the previous regimes under the US occupation. Is India's values sort of anti-Islamic groups? Well, then you would have to go toward Ashrafani. So it's not that values come in one sort of set box or paradigm. A lot of the times you have to, in the field of diplomacy, you pick which values are opportune for that moment and which are not. So it's difficult to sort of place it within such a sort of arbitrary delineation.
I agree with you. I agree with you because this cannot be, just either black or white. You cut it and then there are only two pieces.
I add
the-
something
yes, sir. Please go ahead.
about these Indian values and what they stand for. I think these are BJP values which are being imagined as Indian values. Indian values were in favor of the Arabs in Palestine. In 1938, there is a speech of Mahatma Gandhi, and he explains why this land belongs to the Arabs and not to the Zionist movements. So BJP has built its politics on a communal basis. I think they learned the lesson from Jinnah, how to use religion to win elections and form governments. So what is happening to India is what we have done to Pakistan already. And I am really worried about the way India is going and embracing a man who's charged with genocidal crimes. This is what Modi is doing. I hope this is not the India that we want to be in this region as a major player, allying itself with the worst type of, killers, openly doing it. So Indian values, I think, have been compromised by the present government in power in India. And real India, the one which imagined the freedom for the subcontinent, was a vastly different idea of everybody together and we moving forward. That's the way I would put it.
Thank you for the comment, sir. But that also raises a question as to why MBS keeps shaking hands with Americans and Britain and everybody else, and Saudi Arabia keeps quiet on whatever happens in Palestine, and Jordan is keeping quiet, and everybody else is keeping quiet. So this is politics. This is not about BJP or about in Congress or about Nehru, or this is international politics. There are times when countries do face pressures, and the leaders at that particular time take out the best course out in the manner in which they think they should take it out. As academicians, it's our job to debate the merits and demerits and try and orient it towards principles and values, because that is morality. Somebody talked about morality also. One of the speakers was talking about morality. This is very important, but knowing very well that in politics, morality is a far-fetched dream. But the fact is that that is what it is. So I suppose that opens any other comments or any this thing, because we are just on time. Priyanshu,
None,
do you
sir,
see
you
any
can-
comments? All right, okay.
None, sir.
So,
You can go ahead.
ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me, I will just only touch upon one single highlight of each of the speakers. You have heard them. They've been erudite. They have put across their thoughts in such a succinct and clear manner, done immense justice to the topics that we are handling, given that the time was always at a premium. Notwithstanding, they have done a great justice to their this thing because of their scholarship on the subject in which they have spoken. Let me start with Dr. Nanda Kishor. As I said, I will cover 1 point each. And he talked about Deobandi and the connection and all. But one of the most important observations that he came out with, the difference between the divergence in the Deobandi thought between the Indian Deobandi schools and Afghan schools, is a point that needs to be very carefully studied and understood if we have to translate our relationship with Afghanistan from strength to strength. Okay, there is a subtle difference, and Professor Ahmed incidentally also talked about it in a different manner. He drew from history. I'm not jumping to Professor Ahmed yet, but I'm just bringing him because he also showed in how in that in the colonial struggle for independence, the same shunning of violence was a fundamental principle or a guiding philosophy for people. And the moment you talk about Pashtuns, okay, the first thing that comes to you is all those 6.5 feet tall fellows who are always ready to pick up the sword or gun and fight with you to hell. One of the images that we have. But then, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and as we know him, Frontier Gandhi, proved that non-violence is at the core of the ability to conduct political relationships in a meaningful and constructive manner. What happened, why they were given to Pakistan, why they did not go into Afghanistan, why they did not join India, that of course he had already explained, so we understand that. But we must understand that the divergence in the Deobandi thought, as Professor Kishor highlighted, is an important aspect that we must keep in mind while we are negotiating and trying to improve our relationship with Afghanistan. Coming to Areza Safi, she brought out one very important thought. I think that is an underlining thought which we must carry forward and probably can be applied into anything, any situation. The fragmentation of central authority leads to the rise of regional, entities. Afghanistan was given as adequate examples were given. And this is a phenomena that we see across the world, in any country. Vested interests, vested groups, power groups, influencers, whatever is the name we choose to call, they all begin to shake and shape the course of policies and programs and actions by any country when the central authority becomes weak and is unable to bring all these factions together. In the case of Afghanistan, that is one of the historical reasons why it has survived as Afghanistan, at the same time remained wherever it is because of those. It is positive contribution as well as negative contribution. So it's a very important point that she made. Coming to Ahmad Walid Kakar, he spoke beautifully about the difference between Taliban 1.0 and 2.0. But one single thought, as I said, I will highlight from this thing is non-acceptance by the West lends legitimacy to the policies and programs of Taliban, or at least that is how they take it. Is it a protest against the West? He said so in as many words, because they have ruled us, they have warred against us and all that. So is it a kind of a resistance that if the West does not endorse, then we are doing a good job? Is that a way to look at it? If we take that thought as valid, it's only an argument. See, we're all academicians and scholars, so we must argue. Okay. It's only an argument. If we take that thought as valid, then can we really blame China? No, we cannot. 100 years of humiliation, whatever they are doing is based on that redemption. Redeeming the lost glory, and the sufferings during 100 years of humiliation. So if the West disapproves China, China feels happy. If the West disapproves Taliban, Taliban feels happy. Yes, we are doing the right thing. Is that how we should look at it? So our Ahmad Walid Kakar has actually prepared a nice little, I will say, bomb and put it under our brain. Okay, this is alive. The bomb is not dead. It's alive. Okay, it's a question we need to keep asking. Do we look at a Western endorsement as necessary to prove our legitimacy? I leave it at that question. I'm not going further. Coming to Professor Ahmed, first of all, I must thank you for. If I had traveled for 24 hours, I wouldn't have surfaced. I give you full marks and credit, and I feel highly obliged that I had the privilege of chairing a session in which your learned thoughts could be heard. We are all aware of India's, struggle for independence. What happened in 1937 elections and how how Muslim League came into. Of course, we do hold Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan in very high regard. I belong to the southern parts of India. okay, as south as it can get. And believe me, in our schools, we have Frontier Gandhi's photo. Okay, we respect him. And we see him again as a stark contrast between Gandhi and, see, Gandhi was frail, okay, physically frail. And of course, he believed in non-violence, satyagraha principles and all that we granted to him. So he drew his moral strength from there. I'm making a controversial statement. Maybe because he was not physically disposed to, giving it back. But Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was different. He was a Pathan, he was a Pashtun. Okay. And he willingly, understandingly, and completely accepted non-violence as a core principle. More importantly, we must understand that he did not see himself as a Muslim. He did not. There was no religion in his outlook. They did not want to join India because India is Hindu. They just wanted to be part of United India. He was a great man. He deserves more study and more understanding if we have to understand, shall I say, the Pashtun heart.
Wow, wow, beautiful.
We have to understand. To merely brand Pashtuns as, prone to violence and, prone to this thing is incorrect. There is a core inside them which is as peaceful as you can get when you are in deep meditation. Okay. And Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan reflected that peaceful core. He is an embodiment of that. And therefore, understanding him, understanding his outlook, understanding his life and his teachings is perhaps very important for us if we have to make more stronger strides of friendship towards Afghanistan. Coming to Sangar Paikar, I have already referred to him twice or maybe thrice. But one point that he made, he said, Taliban is transforming. They are not rigid. They are not fundamentalistic in, I'm not talking about religion alone, otherwise also. They are not fundamentalistic as we understand the word fundamentalist. This current month, on the first week of this month, I think those of us who have been watching Afghanistan will know that the Uzbek and the Tajik and Kazakh ministers had traveled to Afghanistan. And you know what is shaping? They have inked this thing for the Kabul corridor, for various other transportation networks, which will eventually connect to the international north-south transport corridor, capable of transporting millions of tons of traffic. And what is important to note is, without involving India, Tajikistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan have sat down and they are now seriously contemplating of reviving what we call as TAPI, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline to get Central Asian energy to all these four countries. Okay, Pakistan is bombing Kabul. Yeah, correct. Okay, and it has proclaimed open war on Afghanistan. Fantastic. Okay, India is very chary about, Pakistan's this thing with reference to Indian foreign minister and Pakistani counterpart, Afghan counterpart have shaken hands, they've hugged each other, gone around making statements. But Afghanistan is quietly working on TAPI. Please understand. So this endorses the point that our dear Sangar Paikar made, that Taliban is transforming. Religion is only one part of their story. They are also learning. They are looking at options. They want to strengthen their relationship and they want to expand their relationship with countries which are surrounding that nation. And that, I feel, is a very good sign. It's a very good sign. I'm grateful to Yashas and Indic Research Forum for calling me here to chat this thing. I assure you that I'm going back with the tons and tons of incidents which I have to show you physically. These are the notes that I have taken of this, and you have provided me ample ammunition for further research. And Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, it's been a singular pleasure meeting you, sir, and I hope we will continue to meet in future. Yeah, and Ahmed Walid Kaka.
BJP government has banned my channel and I speak about Indian-Pakistani peace. They don't like it. So it's not India. Let's hope things for the better. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
I'm very privileged to have taken part in this session. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir, it's a pleasure, sir. And Ahmed Walid Kakar and Rezu Safi, I hope she is back. It's been a pleasure listening to you. And now I will tune into your podcast. I'm talking about Ahmed Walid Kakar. I have not, honestly, I have not heard you. The first time I've had the pleasure of hearing you. Now I will regularly listen to your podcast. Okay. And it's a pleasure meeting all of you. Okay. God bless us all. Okay. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed taking part, and yeah, I wish you all a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
Thank
those
you all.
concluding remarks,
Thank you.
sir. With this, we have come to the end of the first session. I'd like to thank the session chair and speakers for such an enlightening session, specifically Ishtiaq sir for joining us after such a harrowing flight, and Ahmed sir, we share your hatred for Outlook. I would like to also thank the audience for their question and engagement. Please stay tuned for the next session. Thank you.
Priyanshu, can I just